Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the 2021 First California Workshop Series, Product Development and Design Thinking, and to today's session on user testing. I'm Teresa Bateman with First in the San Francisco Bay Area, and here to continue our journey to learn about product development and apply design thinking principles. So let's get started. Our plan for today is to briefly recap the workshop series. Next, our friends at Stanford will share design thinking test techniques that focus on gaining empathy and insights from our users. Then we welcome home a first alum at Lyft and other awesome Lyft employees to share their user testing examples for Lyft bikes. And finally, I'll provide a series wrap up. If you have any questions, please type them into the chat, and we appreciate that you only use chat for questions. At the end of the session, we will have open Q&A with our gracious presenters, so please hang on till the end. For folks that joined us last week, thank you for sharing the fun on social media and joining in on our social media challenges. As you continue your fun first season, please share your team accomplishments with us by tagging us at First in CA. As you can see, there are some special shout outs to our last session's presenters from KLA and Stanford. But in case you missed the info-packed session, we will get you caught up. Here's our familiar map of our journey, which simply went by too fast. We kicked it off with learning about Qualcomm's innovation and Stanford's design thinking techniques, which began with a focus on empathy. At the end of our first session, you determined a strategy to identify your problem for your innovation and/or game design challenge. Next, we learned some fun ways to ideate, including the importance of having a diverse team and being inclusive of our users' needs, thanks to Raytheon and Stanford. Then we learned how to evaluate and filter the many solutions ideas that you've had with tools shared by PwC and Tesseract, such as concept sketching, market, and SWOT analysis. And in the business analysis session, we learned to think like an entrepreneur, to consider our product market fit, value proposition, and preparing a pitch with the help of Arteman White Space Investments and Tesseract. Now, before moving on to the last session's recap, I want to remind you that the finale to this workshop series is receiving a team advisor to get feedback on your innovation, your business case, and/or your pitch, and practicing that at a local pitch party. The first regional director serving your area is in process of contacting teams to confirm interest in a team advisor and also joining the local pitch party. If you're unsure who your regional director is, there's 5 of us based around the state to serve you. We have Dave Berggren supporting San Diego, Janet McKinley serving Sacramento and Central Valley, Kim Beal supporting Orange County and LA, myself in the San Francisco Monterey Bays, and Velma Lomax supporting Ventura, Aerospace Valley, and LA North. We look forward to connecting with each of our gracious teams in the next week. All right, and now for our last session on design thinking prototype. We learned from the Stanford D.school that prototyping isn't just to test functionality, it's for gaining empathy. It allows us to dig deeper into our user needs. Prototyping can be done quickly with a wood block, cardboard, or even paper. And this allows us to fail fast and iterate on our solution. We learned about scenes, props, and roles to set up a prototype test environment, and we'll be expanding on that this week. Our gracious sponsor, KLA, showed prototyping examples highlighting manufacturability and reliability. And also KLA reminded us that prototype is a great place to take risks, try new things, and don't forget to document, as a patent could be in your future. And lastly, your homework was to develop a working prototype determine where and how to test your prototype using scenes, props, and roles, and run a low stakes test to confirm your solution. So now that everybody is up to speed, let's take this knowledge into today's session. Please join me in welcoming back our friends from the Stanford D.School to learn about design thinking test mode.
All right, sounds good. And thank you, Teresa, for that warm welcome. I'm Divya, and Sidra and I will be presenting about testing today. So as a brief introduction, hi, I'm Divya. I'm a sophomore at Stanford studying computer science and biology, and I'm calling in from Houston.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sidra. I'm also a sophomore studying computer science, and I'm calling in from Rogers, Arkansas. And so, as we've learned from Teresa's introduction and from previous workshops, we have this design thinking process. And over the few weeks and over different workshops we've attended, we've learned to empathize with our audience and define the challenges we are taking on, as well as generating ideas and prototyping those ideas. And today, our focus is the test mode of the design process and testing the prototypes we have created. And really everything we have talked about before, from empathizing to defining our problem and creating ideas, this all is still applicable to the test mode of our design thinking process.
Perfect. So with that, today we're going to be focusing on testing, which is the final step in the design thinking process. Once we create different versions of our prototype and we narrow it down to what we want to implement, we move on to testing these prototypes with a variety of different users. This is really useful because sometimes we all have ideas that sound really great in our head, but when it comes time to testing with users, they might not think the same way as we do. So it's a great way to get feedback from users, expose faults in our design, and challenge us to think more deeply about our solutions and how we can make them better.
So going more into what exactly user testing is about, it's an iterative process where you present your product to your audience, you collect feedback, and you refine your solution. And so one important key detail is that in prototyping, for example, you create as if you know you're right. You don't really want to limit yourself to the different ideas or different versions of the products you have or you want to test. But when you go into user testing, it's really important to have the mindset that you know you are wrong. And you really have to be open to making drastic changes to your product, because ultimately it's for the people you're creating for. And so user testing is really about understanding the people who are going to use your product and who are going to interact with your product and observing their behavior and reactions to it. And testing this is the chance to gather feedback, refine solutions, and to continue to learn more about your users. So whether you start small by session recordings or going all out and renting a lab with eye tracking equipment, user testing is a necessary step to make sure you build an effective and efficient product and also create an enjoyable experience for your users.
So now let's talk a little bit more about how we can create the best tests for users to get the most valuable insights. Our goal in testing is to create authentic experiences for users to test your prototypes. To do so, the environment needs to be realistic and needs to mimic something they will encounter often. So for example, let's say you wanted to perform a test on a pen, you may create a testing environment that a person's familiar with, maybe a place where they do their homework or they need to take notes. And a user could do a certain task with your pen that you could really assess how well it's working. There are three key ways we need to think about doing user testing. And the first thing is to learn more about your user. Like we talked about, empathy is a cornerstone of design thinking, and testing is just another opportunity to build more empathy with your user through observation and engagement. This is really important because it can yield unexpected insights. So if a user is maybe spending a little bit more time on a particular screen, that can be an indication that there's something unintuitive there and maybe it's worth taking a second look. The second is refining your prototypes and solutions. So testing informs how you will improve your prototype going forward. And sometimes this does mean going back to the drawing board, scrapping a feature and restarting. The third is testing and refining your point of view. Point of views were critical in developing our features in the first point. And through testing, we may understand that we might not have fully understood what a user was saying in their point of view. So testing may help us understand that we framed the problem incorrectly. And once we reframe the problem correctly, we might get to a better solution.
And so here's a brief video of user testing that really hones in on the key details we want you to walk away with.
So this video is going to focus more on software testing, but the lessons talked about in this video are super applicable to any type of testing.
And this slide talks about what you can gain as a business or as an individual working on a product from user testing. And it really emphasizes that you can gain valuable insight by learning to understand your user and your audience and creating a product for them.
Yeah, so some advantages about user testing are similar to those we talked about before. It helps us understand the consumer or customer more deeply and gives us insight about how we can make a product better for their use.
And so on this slide, you can see the presenter in the background using paper prototypes, which if you have attended the prototype presentation, then you see that this is a really effective way of conducting user testing because it's cheap and efficient and you can still gain valuable insight from whatever your user is struggling with. For example, if they're struggling to find a certain button or they're struggling to see where a certain link is, then you know that's an indication that you need to change something in your design. And this is something we really want to emphasize with user testing.
So there are multiple types of user testing, each to figure out a particular pain point or for some particular purpose. Today we'll be talking about a couple of them.
And this is just a brief overview of the overall user testing process. And as you can see, it's iterative like we've stated, and we'll also be going more in depth as to how you guys can create proper user testing and how you can, how to properly interview your user and asking the right questions and creating suitable environments for them to run the tests with.
Perfect. So overall, it's really important to understand both the interviewer and interviewee perspective when creating user tests. So it allows you to build empathy with the person you're interviewing and also better understand the risks or consequences or issues surrounding your product and what impact it may have. The biggest thing about user testing is they tend not to go how we might expect. So this next video is a little funny introduction into how a tester could get more insight into the product because the user doesn't do exactly what we expect they would.
Can you guess which spot that goes in?
The square.
That's right. It goes in the square hole.
Yes. Okay.
And how about this rectangle? That one
Also the square.
that goes in there too.
Yeah.
Up next, we've got this thin rectangle.
The thin
Can you guess
rectangle.
where that goes?
The thin rectangle.
That's right. It goes in the square hole. And up next, a cylinder.
The circle.
I think that goes in
The circle.
the square hole. Now, we've also got this semicircle right here. Do you see a slot that would fit
The semicircle.
semicircle?
The semicircle.
That's right. It's the square hole. Okay. Up next, the triangle. We know what hole that goes
The
into,
triangle.
right?
Triangle.
That's right. The square hole. And up next, we have the arch.
The arch. The
And
arch.
you guessed it.
The arch.
It goes in the square
Oh,
hole.
God.
So as you can see, the tester, while slightly frustrated, gained new insight into her product and can now go back to her team with these results and improve it to fix whatever misconceptions they had between the user and the developer. So it's really important that you communicate with each other. And this is a really important step for you to help develop a better product.
Sorry about that. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about types of testing, and probably one of the most common is A/B testing, which is a research methodology where you show two different variants of a similar screen or a similar feature to users and allow them to make comparisons between the two. So as you can see on the slide, this is an A/B test where you could do it with login screens, and this helps understand what the user prefers by giving them another basis to compare against. So maybe they could say insights like, I like the color of this button on this screen better than another. And in doing so, they're able to make comparisons between these two and help you figure out what works most effectively and what they're most interested and intrigued by.
And so there are two different two different tools that we often use during testing. The first one is qualitative testing, and this is where you really focus on what the users seem to struggle with. And so this is a direct assessment of the usability of your product. And so researchers will observe their participants struggling with certain aspects of their design, and they can infer which aspects of the design are problematic and which work well. And so during qualitative testing, you can often ask your participants follow-up questions or change the course of the study to gain more insight into specific issues that the participant experience. For example, if you're testing a water bottle design and your user is struggling to open the cap of the water bottle, or the water bottle might be really heavy and so it's hard for them to grasp and hold on to, then that is an indication that you need to rethink your water bottle design. And it's important to really study their body language, their facial expressions, and small comments that the user makes. And as you collect firsthand knowledge at the user's individual level, by focusing on their emotions and actions, you can really you can take those findings back to the drawing board and change whatever you need to change. And so this picture just explains how the methods usually used in qualitative testing are interviews and observation, and it gives you the chance to study the user's emotions and expectations and focus on the problems they encounter. And whenever you go back to the drawing board and create your new prototype and you test that new prototype, you want to make sure you have made your product more efficient and easier for your user to use.
A second form of testing that goes hand in hand with qualitative testing is quantitative testing. So quantitative testing tends to be more data-driven and using observations to compare different kinds of interfaces. So unlike qualitative user testing, which focuses more on a user's experiences, maybe their emotions, what they seem to be struggling with, quantitative testing requires a precise measuring instrument, and we use math to try to derive some kind of insights. So typically qualitative testing is used for answering questions like why or how can we fix a problem, while quantitative is more of the how many, how much type of questions that we're trying to answer. So these examples of what we're trying to test in a quantitative test can include time saved, new users, or cost. And we can compare different versions of a new feature effectively by using this one baseline as a metric between the two. So let's say we had two features and feature A took 5 seconds to use and feature B took 10 seconds to use. It might be an indication that there's something in feature A that lends itself to being completed more quickly. And this is just to reiterate what we were just talking about, where quantitative testing can be used to analyze trends in user behavior using numerical data, statistics, percentages, and numbers, things like that. It focuses more on the big picture from groups with a significant sample. So while qualitative testing, we want individual stories and emotions, quantitative helps us aggregate all this data by putting common metrics to it. And we can use questionnaires, surveys, or A/B testing in order to perform a good, robust quantitative test.
And so the big question is, who do we test and who do we recruit for for testing our product? And it's really important that you understand your audience and demographic. And so you want to make sure you find a diverse set of users who are most commonly going to use your product. And it's also really important that you think about extreme users. For example, if you're testing cars, then you want to really think about tall individuals as well as really short individuals. And this, who to recruit and who to test, is not only important for the quality of your product, but it's also really important for the safety of your product. And the next presenters who are from Lyft will give more insight as to how recruiting different people to test really changes the insight you can gain from your product or from your tests.
Absolutely. And the most important thing about an interview is being able to ask good questions to get good insights from these interviews. So the main thing is we want to stray away from asking leading or biased questions, saying like, do you like this feature? Or how much do you really love this feature? Might sway people into liking a feature more than they actually would if you just ask them for their opinion on this. We also want to cover a variety of questions. So who, what, when, where, why, and have users talk through their experience in each of these types of questions and answers, and be very careful to use like their language as opposed to technical jargon that you and your team might be working with while developing a product. Your user might not be familiar with that jargon, so try to make it as easy to understand as possible. So as a quick reminder, it's super important to understand both the perspective of the interviewer and the interviewee. So we'll go through a quick process where we're brainstorming questions about this, and we'll talk about these questions more in breakout rooms. But before we do so, we want to give you a quick demonstration about how to conduct a good interview.
And so before we go into this presentation, we want to lay out exactly the situation we're demonstrating. And this is also helpful for whenever you go into your own breakout rooms and discuss or do your own activities. And so when you're acting out your interviews, it's important to set the scene, such as when and where would your users be testing your product? What props would you need to use? What are you testing? And what roles would everyone be playing? And so in our demonstration, where we will be conducting, we're testing headphone qualities of a certain headphone. We will be sitting outside, we're pretending we're sitting outside at a park in a slightly busy area that has some background noise. And we're going to be wearing, the props are going to be headphones, and I'm going to be pretending to sit on a bench or a relaxing place to sit. And the roles are going to be the interviewer and the interviewee. And we really want you to focus on how the interviewer answers questions with questions and uses the same terms and vocabulary as the user. And we also want you to notice how the interviewer does not influence the user by possibly indicating what their opinion is or helping them out with anything they're having trouble with.
Absolutely. So with that, let's get into the demonstration. So I'll be playing the role of the interviewer and Sidra will be playing the role of the interviewee. And I'm trying to find out her thoughts about her new headphones. So with that, hi Sidra, thank you for your willingness to try our headphones. My team and I greatly appreciate it. Today we're going to be testing headphone sound quality, and we'd like you to listen to 3 different songs through Spotify. As you use these headphones, we'd like you to talk through your thought process, what sounds good in each song, and how you feel about the features of the headphone.
That sounds good. I'll start playing the first song.
Perfect. So how do you feel about the headphones, and how did the song sound to you?
Comfort-wise, I do like the way these headphones fit, and pairing them to my phone wasn't difficult, but I do feel like the audio was kind of muffled, especially whenever I played it like at this specific spot in the song. It's really hard to kind of hear what, like the specific notes that they're kind of talking about, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Can you elaborate a little bit more on which specific notes or sounds were muffled for you?
Yeah, so I feel like the lower notes are much more difficult for me to hear compared to higher notes. But I also feel like it sounds a bit pitchy.
I see. So which sound sounded pitchy to you?
So higher notes sound very pitchy to me, and it starts to hurt my ears after a little bit. So maybe that's something you could look into fixing.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Thank you for your feedback. So now let's go to the next song, and please let me know what you're feeling as I play this.
If it hadn't been for Cotton Eye Joe, I'd been married a long time ago. Where did you come from? Where did you go? Where did you come from, Cotton Eye Joe? If it hadn't been for Cotton Eye Joe, I'd been married a long time ago. Where did you come from? Where did you go? Where did you come from, Cotton Eye Joe?
This one doesn't come out clearly at all. I like how the bass sounds here, but the bass kind of overpowers the lyrics, so it's a little annoying. And I also didn't have trouble adjusting the audio in my first song, but I think all the buttons being so close together on the headphones is kind of confusing for me, and it's kind of hard to distinguish between what's the audio button and what's the power button, if that makes sense.
That does. Thank you for that. So on a scale of maybe 1 to 10, how would you rate the audio quality?
Maybe a 2.
I'm sorry. And from a scale of 1 to 10, how easy would you say it was to adjust the audio?
Maybe a 5.
5. Perfect. And then one last question. On a scale of 1 to 10, did you like the way it sounded with headphones overall?
I feel like it could use still some work. It was kind of hard to listen to. The sound wasn't really very balanced for me. I think the low notes were easier to hear, but the high notes they really hurt my ears. And also the background noise, I could still hear the background noise, so it was kind of hard to focus on the lyrics themselves.
All right, thank you so much for your feedback. So would you mind playing the third song and doing the same process?
No problem.
It might seem crazy what I'm about to say. Sunshine, she's here, you can take a break. I'm a hot air balloon that could go to space. With the air, like I don't care, baby, by the way. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Because I'm happy.
I really liked this song better. It was much more stable than the second song. Maybe that might lend a hand into making it easier to hear, but it also was not as pitchy as the first and was able to hear the lyrics and the beat. It still goes quiet at some points for me. So that's an issue that's still present.
Yeah, could you maybe point me to a segment of the song where it went quiet for you?
I think towards the beginning, whenever he starts singing happy and then he starts clapping, the clapping kind of runs together, and because it's just so quiet. So the headphones, they kind of like just dip in quality from there. But overall, I think the song was much better to listen to compared to the first two.
Perfect, thank you. So I'm going to ask you the same kind of scale of 1 to 10 questions. So first, on a scale of 1 to 10, how good would you rate the audio quality?
I think for this song, it was definitely around a 6.
6, perfect. On a scale of 1 to 10, how easy was it to adjust the audio?
It's still the same, maybe still around a 5.
And
Yeah.
overall, did you like the way it sounded with headphones on a scale of 1 to 10?
Yeah, I think it sounded really good. Probably because Pharrell is a good singer, but also the the sound was the headphones really helped to emphasize like different parts of the song and the beats, and so.
Yeah, definitely. So now let's talk a little bit about all three overall, just quickly. So which song would you say you enjoyed the most? What about the least?
I enjoyed the third song the most. It was just a better experience listening to it overall, and the least was definitely the second. Because the audio was kind of cutting off at certain points and the low notes were kind of too quiet to hear. And I also feel like I really wouldn't use these headphones in a loud, crowded area because the background noise does tend to overpower the music I was listening to. And I would really enjoy some noise canceling features you might want to fit into the headphones to create a more balanced sound, or yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for your feedback and for participating in this interview.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So overall, that was a really great interview, and I learned a lot about certain points in the song that maybe were harder for Sidra to listen to, and that would give me some insight into what I need to do to improve those headphones. Some things she suggested, like the noise canceling features, are also really great suggestions. But sometimes user testing doesn't go as we expected, and this is a funny video that kind of demonstrates that point.
Sean, hi.
Hi.
Have a seat. I'm Talina. I'm the researcher who's going to be working with you today. And have you ever done a usability test before?
No.
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 Now, for our session today, we're going to pretend that you're hungry and have come across some different fruit options for midday snack. For each task, I will give you a piece of paper with a description of what I would like you to do. So let's begin with the first task.
Okay.
This is the task card. If you could just read that aloud and then begin the task whenever you're ready.
Show me how you would eat this. See?
What kind of peel would you say that is?
This was not a thick peel. Watch. Do this. I'm gonna, yeah.
Try it. Here's one way.
Well,
Okay.
it's round like an egg. I just thought maybe it would,
Yeah.
crack.
So it looks like you're struggling a little bit.
You know, there.
You've seen my boots right now. I used orange peel on these. Look at that luster. Isn't that
Oh.
amazing?
Oh.
That'll wake you up every morning.
Grip it here, and I
That's the
press the
technique you like to use?
I press the stem away with my thumb and hold it out of the way so it's not in the way of my mouth. I put this finger here.
And I just do a little bit of the dipsies in here.
I will only eat one of this for breakfast on the weekend in my house.
I like apples a little bit more if they're cut for me.
Pre-cut. You like
Yeah.
the pre-cut.
And I don't always have to know who cut them. Sometimes it's nice to wonder who cut this apple for me.
It's a nice surprise.
Yeah.
Do you know what that is?
I think it's lychee. Whew.
I thought at first that it was like a raspberry on steroids, but it isn't soft like a raspberry. In fact, it kind of looks like a dinosaur, what I imagine a dinosaur skin would look like. So it's a little bit intimidating at first.
Ew. Oh my god, what is that? Oh, okay. Oh, weird.
And think about how you might go about using this pineapple.
That is a beautiful pineapple.
Okay. And on a scale of 1 to 7, with 1 being very difficult and 7 being very easy, how difficult would you say that it was for you to eat this orange?
So 1 is really difficult?
Yes, 1 very difficult, 7 very easy.
I will say 2.
2.
Only because I've had worse luck with grapefruit.
Grapefruit is worse.
Grapefruit's worse.
How would you say a banana compares to an apple?
Well, you're talking to an apple man. You know, if a banana is sitting there, I will do it, but not with the enthusiasm that I would an apple. And especially if you were to cut that apple for me.
Okay.
That's good banana.
So I think this is just an example of how user testing can maybe show that the users don't think about things nearly the same way as we do.
Okay, so now it's your turn to conduct your own interviews. And so the problem we have presented to you guys is that heavy backpacks are uncomfortable for students in college or for commuting students. And our proposed solution is having a backpack with multiple adjustable straps. And the scene that we have set for the testing environment is an outside park that allows the users to run and move with the pack. And the different roles you can have are the user, the interviewer, the documenter, and the photographer, just to help also document your observations. And so we really want you to, within these 15 minutes, to generate as many questions that you would ask your interviewees about their experience with the new backpack design. And after 5 minutes or so, we would like you to share out within the breakout rooms, and we will give you feedback. The different facilitators will give you feedback on how you can improve your question, just to lower the amount of biasness it might be presenting, or just to allow the user to talk through their experience a little better. And so the next slide, please.
Yeah, just a reminder that breakout sessions are not recorded, so please participate and brainstorm ideas with the other people in your room.
Yes, and so additional information is that we're all going to be randomly placed into a breakout room. Our facilitators need to get to their assigned room, so give us a moment, take a stretch, take a deep breath while you wait for us, and enjoy your transport to a breakout room.
Absolutely. So the next portion would be sharing out, how did your breakout rooms go? Did you have any interesting questions that you'd love to share? And
so we've got Shreya that's available to share.
Yeah, sure. So some questions and stuff that we were thinking is like how helpful and then like what benefits. And then we wanted to make sure to ask about their comfortability. And then we had them like the responses. We also did like when they were running, is it comfortable? And then when it was walking, was it comfortable? To be more specific. And then we also, like when we were rephrasing the questions, we also figured like, because we had a question for like, would you like to add or change stuff? And then the response was like, so when like the adjustable straps got pulled, like all the extra parts of it, like when you pull the strap, the rest of the strap is just dangling around. So we were trying to figure out if you could like roll it up or put it away somewhere. And then when we were reworking the questions, we also added like, is there anything you also want to remove from the backpack? Because we had add or change, but we never had anything removed. So that's like that's like how our questions were going.
Amazing. Sounds like some really incredible questions.
Yep.
So our next student that should be sharing is Matthew.
Yeah, so over in room 7, we were kind of talking about what are some of the complications that could come up with our product. You know, is the strap system too complicated? Does it actually make a difference on load bearing if students can feel that? But when we were going over the user response data, ultimately one of the refined questions we wanted to know is if it was user friendly and how easy our product was to be able to use. And yeah, that's about what we got to.
Yeah, amazing. Those are definitely really important features we need to consider when talking about a backpack for college students. So thank you so much for sharing. All right, perfect. So with that, let's jump into our next segment, which is how can we analyze the results we get when we ask these questions and get some responses?
And so this is a feedback capture matrix, and it'll help you document any feedback that your users have given you or any of their facial expressions that you may have been analyzing, their body language. And if you can go to the next slide, it shows more of an in-depth, it gives more details about what each box represents. And so the delta is maybe any change that you would want to have based off of some of the comments that your users have made. The light bulb at the bottom right corner is maybe any ideas that you and your team generated to fix these issues. And then the question mark is where you kind of discuss, is this approach towards our design really, is this the best way to do this? Is there a more efficient way, more accessible or user-friendly way to do this design? And so some of the questions could be, why should people use this app? Was this successful? What were some difficulties that they came across? And then the plus corner is where you can, the changes that you've made and what you can do to improve. And so like or like next steps. And so something you can do is like integration of maps in the UI after you realize like, oh, this was something we were missing, and so we should add this. And then, or maybe sometimes you didn't get as much insight as you may have wanted, and you may want to conduct more user testing interviews just to learn more from different perspectives. And so this feedback capture matrix is really useful for really analyzing and breaking down your results.
Absolutely. And based on some of the feedback we were talking about earlier in the previous slide, something positive could be maybe the backpack was super comfortable and people found it easy to walk and run around in it. Something to change would maybe be rolling up the straps, as we discussed earlier. A question could be something like, when would this backpack be used the most, and how can we design for use around that? And then an insight could maybe be that something like rolling up the straps made us think about something really cool or a new feature we could add onto the bag.
And so after this, we really want you guys to think more about major research questions and maybe reframe your point of view or your hypothesis and draft a test plan for whatever product you're designing, and think about the different versions, different methods you can use to test, like qualitative testing, quantitative testing, A/B testing, and also really think about who should you interview, and make sure you keep in mind to interview a diverse set of users and interview people at the extremes. And after, try to run at least one type of test, and we promise you that you will definitely find some things that you might need to change, and you'll improve your design overall. And with that, thank you so much. And we'll hand it back to Teresa.
Thank you, Sidra and Divya, for a great session, giving us some excellent pointers on how to interview our users, as well as some fun demonstrations. So I'd like to hand off to our next group of presenters, which are from Lyft, to see amazing industry examples of user testing at Lyft bikes. Please take it away.
Awesome. We're super excited. Hey, everyone. I'm Nadia. I'm a product manager, and I'm going to share my presentation. Let's make sure we can all see it. All right. Can everyone see the presentation? Awesome. Well, we'll dive right in. We're super excited to be here with all of you. We're going to give a little bit of intros to our team, the Lyft crew, as well as to Lyft and what we work on there. And then we're going to dive into a design challenge. So all of those great design thinking that Divya and Sidra shared, we're going to talk about how we use it at Lyft on a specific challenge that we had around unlocking shared bikes. We'll talk a little bit about why do user testing, how we do user testing, both qualitatively and quantitatively. And we'll have a really great breakout session. To give a little teaser, we'll go back to our backpack research, and then we'll recap our key takeaways. So with that, I'll dive into intros. Brady, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so hi, I'm Brady. Good morning, everyone. I'm a software engineer at Lyft, and I work on the bikes and scooters team. And here's an embarrassing high school photo of me from my team 686 days. So just don't share that online because I can't let the world see this.
Varna, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Varna. I'm a UX researcher at Lyft. I unfortunately was not on an FRC team, but when I was younger, I was on an FLL team, and then I did VEX Robotics in high school. So definitely super interested and excited to meet you all.
Awesome. Like I said, I'm Nadia. I'm a product manager on the team at Lyft. I was not a first student, but I'm really excited to get to spend time with you all now, and I wish that I had been. And with that, we'll dive in. So what do we work on at Lyft? Who are we? So at Lyft, our mission is to improve people's lives with the world's best transportation. And when we think about what does that mean today, you think about, for many, many folks, transportation is personal car ownership. It's freedom when you sort of get the keys to your car, you can see your friends for the first time with independence. But over time, what we've realized is actually there's a lot of challenges that come with that. It takes up a ton of space for parking. There's a lot of congestion, both in terms of our streets and in terms of our environment. It's actually not super great for our air quality. It's not super sustainable. And so at Lyft, what we mean by improving people's lives with the world's best transportation is creating options to help people get around to reduce that need for personal car ownership. And so what does that actually break down into? When we're thinking about it, it's transportation equity. How do we help people who don't necessarily have great access to transportation where they live? How do we help them get around when in the past, they might have had sort of a desert, they would have needed a car to get to the store to get groceries? How do we help create safer streets? So if you want to ride your bike, in Manhattan, in New York, or in the streets of Berkeley, how do we make sure there's protected bike lanes, there's infrastructure that makes it feel really, really safe to get around? How do we help connect public transportation, subways, trains, buses, Muni and BART? It's sort of the key infrastructure for transportation for a lot of our cities. So how do we help people get to their public transit station? How do we integrate that? And finally, environmental sustainability. How do we make sure that the transportation options we're introducing help keep our cities green and healthy? And so within Lyft, we offer lots of different types of transportation, but Brady, Varna, and I are all on our transit, bikes, and scooters team, where we're introducing what we call micro-mobility, bikes, scooters, as well as connecting the transit to help folks get around in sort of the hearts of the cities. So what does that actually mean? We're trying to create personal transportation solutions that people love, that our riders love to ride, and that cities need and want. And so let's dive into our design challenge around unlocking shared bikes. So before we dive in, let's think a little bit about what is the life cycle, of a Lyft bike ride? Maybe you haven't seen a Bay Wheels before, but if you have, you want to first discover that bikes are available in your city. You want to be able to onboard and set up so you can take that first ride. You want to think about planning your trip. Where are you going? Is there bike lanes? Are you going to be riding on the street? How do you actually get there? And then you're going to go pick up your bike. So unlike, if you have your own bike, you're actually going to a dock or station where you're going to go to unlock your bike. On your ride, you might need directions. You might be thinking about, stops on the way. And finally, when you arrive, how do you make sure that you're safely parking? You're able to sort of get it back to the station. You're not blocking the sidewalk or parts of the street. So that's sort of the life cycle of a Lyft bike ride. And so what does that actually look like in our streets? Here are some examples from DC, San Francisco, New York. You can see that there are pretty big docks where you have lots and lots of shared bikes available for folks to use to get around their cities. And when you dock a bike, you're actually putting it into this docking station where it locks in place and is ready for the next rider. So today, we're going to really focus on that unlocking experience when you, a rider, are taking that bike out of that dock. So our goal, and I'm going to ask you to put your product manager hats on, join us on the team at Lyft for this, and this is a real thing that we worked on, is to decide whether we want to change our bike unlock experience to a completely new design. So to give an example of what our current experience is, it's actually this keypad that you're seeing here, and we'll go a little bit into that. But first, let's think about, we're working on this design, like what are our goals? So we set some guiding principles for ourselves to help us figure out what's the right experience for our riders. How do we sort of think about this unlocking experience? So unlocking should be fast. Riders are choosing a bike because they have somewhere to be. They don't want to be stuck in our app or at our station yanking on a bike. It should be reliable. This process needs to work every time. Daytime, nighttime, low light conditions. Someone's phone might have died. We need to have a plan for low and lost network connectivity. And it should be intuitive. This is something that we want our regular bike riders to use and have be a great process, but also for someone who's never taken a shared bike before. It might be their first time. They might have an older phone or a newer phone. We want to make sure that it's intuitive for all of those different types of riders. And so let's talk about this experience and what our options are as we think about this redesign. So today, when you sort of go to a station, this is our original experience. You get a key code in your Lyft app, and then you're able to actually go to the physical station and dock and enter that code. Once you enter the code, the bike will unlock and you'll be able to start your ride. So it's a PIN code system. Our new design is a QR code system. So maybe you've used a QR code for other things, but in this case, you're using it to unlock your bike. You see the QR code on that rear wheel fender cover. You're opening your app, you're scanning it, and the bike unlocks. So now you've got your product manager hat on, you're on the team with me here at Lyft. Let's take a moment to think about it. And I think feel free to type what you think in the chat. Are you going to decide to keep the station PIN code, which is our option A? Or are you going to change to the new design and go for QR codes for the bike unlocks, option B? Go ahead, take a second, and then we'll talk through how we might use research to help with this. Awesome. So go ahead and type, if you haven't already, what would you do? Old or new, A or B? So let's talk before we dive into our research about what would we use user testing for here? What's the role? So, you might be working on this with the team. You and I might be testing the QR codes and loving it. We might be saying, this is fast. This seems easy. I use QR codes all the time. It works great with my iPhone. Like, let's ship it. Like, people are going to love this. So team feedback is definitely important, but so is our rider feedback. We're building products for our riders, not just ourselves. So maybe you and I tested it, in the workday in the afternoon, there's great lighting, but one of our riders trying to take a bike out, late at night, they had a late shift, they're getting home and it's dark, they can't scan the code. Or someone else might have a phone where the camera is broken. Maybe they dropped it, and so they're not able to scan that QR code at all. Or someone might be looking at the basket and not seeing a QR code. There's no QR code here. They might not be able to find it. So while you and I might think this is awesome, it's really, really important that we get user feedback to sort of help us understand, is this actually a better solution? And so when we're thinking about how are we going to actually test, variation is super important. Every user is different. It's really different to run a test with LeBron, who's super tall, versus me, where I'm a little more average. You know, someone might be different heights, different thoughts, different phones, different approaches. The environment might be different. So today in a lot of cities, our stations are covered in snow. That's a really different experience than a perfect weather, gorgeous day. User testing enables us to test in realistic scenarios to understand different environmental variations. It gives us a fresh perspective. We can definitely be experts in our own products, but sometimes that hurts objectivity. And finally, it gives us hard data. By gathering data as we test, we can make good decisions that will more confidently meet our goals. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Varna, who's going to walk us through qualitative testing and how that applies to this unlock experience.
Awesome. Thanks, Nadia. If you want to grab the next slide. So this is how we do qualitative research at Lyft. We usually start by identifying the research questions, really identifying the hypotheses that we're trying to test. We prepare prototypes and really draft what is this plan and the questions that we're going to test, just like we did in the first breakout session. Then we actually run the interviews or observations. We capture our data. Usually we bring our team along to take notes and photos. And then we spend a lot of time synthesizing our learnings as a group with sticky notes, any of those kind of tools to really gather our thoughts and figure out what are the biggest insights from this research. So we'll start with talking about how do we identify a research question. So in this case, here's an example where we're trying to figure out the objective of simplifying the bike undocking or unlocking experience for our riders. Some of our questions was, I think some of the things that came up in the chat, what are like the biggest pain points associated with the current experience? What are the main areas that we need to improve the experience? So for example, one of the many, many hypotheses the teams came up with is, maybe there's just too much steps in the PIN code experience. You have to open the app, you have to get the PIN code, and then you have to type it in and then unlock your bike. So maybe there's just 4 steps and we can reduce that to 1 or 2. And then our second question, kind of focusing on the QR code, is are there any barriers or are there any benefits to introducing a new QR scan experience? Since this is also such a new experience for the riders, our hypothesis was maybe that's going to be hard for them to discover this on the bike. How do we introduce this to them, as well as some of those environmental variation conditions that Nadia talked about. So we started with this plan, and then we started to draft our test plan. What are we going to do and how are we going to test this? So what we did on the left is we started with kind of a station observation. Since a lot of this PIN code unlocks are already live, we did some scrappy testing where we observed participants across multiple markets in New York, in DC, in Denver, in SF, and we watched riders unlock their PIN codes. We also did some what we call guerrilla testing, where we walked up to riders and we had them actually walk us through that experience of unlocking as they did so in their everyday life. When we were trying to test the QR scan prototype, we didn't want to heavily invest and really build out this product. So we started with a really quick prototype. You can see here, we literally printed out a piece of paper that looks like a QR code, and we taped it onto the back of an existing bike. And that's what we used to test before really investing in building out that feature. If you go to the next slide, when we were able to start recruiting participants, I think like Nadia mentioned before, it's really important to have that variation in terms of participants. So making sure we're really considering all of our users, a diverse mix of participants across socioeconomic status, gender, especially language, location and region. Especially for something physical like a bike, it's really important to have a mix of height and weight and age and physical ability and tech savviness to really make sure this product works across a lot of body types and a lot of people. I know some of the comments coming up in the chat is if someone doesn't have a smartphone, that would be a user we test for. How do we kind of design this experience for those kind of edge cases? And then secondly, the way we tactically figure out how do we get these participants to actually come to our study, we craft what we call screener surveys, and we send this out to potential populations. And we ask specific questions to make sure we're able to get riders who fit our specific criteria. So we'll ask questions about their height, or kind of their, what kind of rides have you taken in the last 1 month to make sure that they're a perfect participant for our study. So then we're gonna start conducting our testing, conducting those interviews and observations. So I'm gonna give a quick recap. I think Sidra discussed this really well before, so I'm gonna do a quick recap. I think it's really important during these sessions to make sure your participant is feeling really comfortable, make sure they feel warm and welcome during the interview, making sure we ask those non-leading questions. It's especially important when you're testing a product, especially when they're looking at their past history, to see concrete examples. So instead of saying, you know, how do you feel about your bike in general, asking, you know, give me a specific moment when your bike didn't work for you, and having that kind of story is much more powerful than asking them for a general example. Using their words, we have a lot of internal jargon around, we call it an e-bike, or we have special code names for our bikes, but our participants tend to use words like battery bike or power bike. And so when we're running these sessions, we try to mimic their language and make sure it makes sense for them. And then, like we talked about before, really probing in with some of these follow-up questions around why and how they're using specific products. This is a really quick cheat sheet that I think is super helpful. Some handy phrases to memorize, especially for those follow-up questions. Things like, can you tell me more? What happens next? A really good tactic I like to use in my interviews is, how would you describe something to a friend? That really helps the participant really reframe their perspective and explain it in really simple terms. And then remembering to not ask questions around what do you like, but more like, what do you think about this product, and making sure we're staying unbiased. So now, you know, we're ready to start our sessions. We're gonna start capturing our data. It's really important to take really good notes and capture your data for all of our really deep synthesis afterwards. So we usually ask participants to talk out loud. Sometimes we take photos and videos to observe their behavior, or sometimes we have some really exciting worksheets for participants to fill out as they're going through the study. This helps us really capture their insights from that first person point of view. In our research, we also really like to use direct quotes. That really helps you get the emotion and some of that first person language from the participants and using their words. And lastly, videos, photos, audios, just capture it all. You can see here on top, this is an example of when we went to DC. We did a bunch of user testing with transit riders. We took the bus with them, and then we tested prototypes with them right afterwards. Unfortunately, only a few people on the team were able to join this trip, but we created these really awesome highlight reels. We had a watch party, and everyone was able to build that really deep user empathy with our riders afterwards, even though they weren't able to attend the actual interview session. So that's a really powerful tool to getting the rest of your team to really empathize and understand some of these pain points with your product. Cool, so now you've wrapped up all of this research, you spent so much time collecting this data, how do you make sense of it? So here's a couple examples of how we think about synthesis, especially kind of the end product. We found it really helpful to think about what would be my one, New York Times headline about one or two main learnings from this research. So here's an example of what we learned from some of the pin code observations. So I think, like our hypothesis, there was a lot of steps involved in the pin code typing and unlocking experience. And because this is so complicated, writers were looking for some external factors to help validate that they were successful in unlocking their bike. So we noticed that a bunch of writers were waiting for this kind of click sound as their confirmation that they had a successful unlock. And the sound was super helpful and really often difficult to hear against the noise of city streets. And it was really surprising for us because this click sound was more of like a mechanical unlock that happened when the bike just kind of opened from the lock. It wasn't something intentional that we designed. But after doing this kind of observation, we realized it was such a crucial kind of tactical feedback for the riders when they were unlocking their bike. And this was a really good inspiration. In our future work, we try to think of, can we create a sound or a chime when someone unlocks a scooter or a bike in the future, and trying to mimic this natural kind of confirmation that riders were looking for. If you go to the next slide, this is an example of what we learned from some of the QR code testing. People were really familiar with the QR code and the scanning action, which we thought was really great. It helped with some of the intuitive nature of how easy is it for someone to quickly unlock their bike with their phone. But we noticed that at least half of our participants didn't really locate the decal. They didn't locate the actual location of the QR code on the back of the bike. And they spent some significant time searching for it. And most people we noticed actually looked for the handlebars or kind of the front of the bike as a place to unlock it. So this is an example of what felt super obvious to the team was not super obvious to a new user. And in the end, we kind of decided to maybe put the QR code in multiple places, maybe one of those handlebar locations that was more intuitive, as well as this bigger surface on the back of the bike. These are just some of the examples of what we started to learn. And now we're gonna run a second breakout group where we're gonna analyze some kind of potential qualitative research data from your backpack research. So we have a kind of a set of quotes from 5 interviews with college students, let's pretend. And we're gonna synthesize these data into a couple themes or next steps. These can be, you know, insights like what I showed, like these New York Times headlines. It could be, you know, what are some areas of inspiration for your product as you iterate the next cycle. And as a reminder, our problem is kind of the heavy backpacks that are uncomfortable for students commuting to college. And the proposed solution that we've been testing is some kind of backpack with multiple adjustable straps. Teresa, do you have anything you want to add before we break out into the groups?
No, just kind of recapping that we're actually all going to go to the same breakout rooms that we were before. Breakout rooms are not recorded. Share your screen, share your voice, and please collaborate with us. Thanks, everyone. While you're doing that, we have a couple students that want to share what they've learned in their breakout session. We'll start off with Lana, please.
Yeah, so our biggest takeaway was that we need to change the straps so that it can be easier to use for people of different heights.
Fantastic. And we have another student, Danielle. Can you share what insights you learned from your users during the breakout session?
Yeah, so we learned that like definitely the straps need to be adjusted or like easier for the users to adjust and have maybe a broader range of adjustability for people who are taller or shorter. And the next steps or actions would probably be to ask questions like, what would you suggest to fix these issues you're mentioning, just to like get an insight on how they think it should be fixed and like what they believe or like what they think on the straps on a scale of like 1 to 10.
That's awesome. These are great insights. So now, thank you so much, Danielle and Alana. We're gonna hop back to talk a little bit about quantitative testing now that we've got a good chance to practice qualitative tests. So with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Brady from our team. He's gonna talk a little bit about how do we make data-driven design decisions, and we'll go back to sort of our bike unlocking scenario. Think about, you know, whether you thought you'd change that design or not. And Brady, take it away.
All right, thanks, Nadia. Cool, so Varna gave us a nice intro or talked about how qualitative tests at Lyft are used, where we interview our users and observe how they use our product and use what we learned to influence how we design our product. And sometimes what you'll find is you'll run a qualitative test and you'll get some kind of conflicting feedback from people. You might see one person prefers the PIN code experience. It's what they've always used. They're familiar with it. They don't want it to change. Another person tried QR unlock and it was fast and they really liked it. So sometimes it can be difficult to make a good decision here around what product direction to go in. So this is where quantitative tests can help. So the most simple quantitative test we could run, just to get some numeric answer to help guide us, is say, which one do you prefer? Do you like it with a PIN code or do you prefer it with a QR code for unlocking? And maybe we get a tally. We've got 13 testers. We get 8 votes for QR code and 5 votes for PIN code. So maybe not the best quantitative test, but this is just like as simple as it gets in terms of getting data to help us guide in terms of what product direction we go in. Let's go to the next slide. So just to kind of give a high level overview of why you'd want to run a quantitative test versus a qualitative test. Well, one thing that quantitative tests give you is precise comparable metrics. It's really hard to compare two like paragraphs versus 2 numbers. So quantitative tests can be very precise and you can detect sometimes subtle differences that a user might not bring up in an interview. For example, if unlocking one way was 1 second faster, would the person say that in their feedback, or would that not come up until you actually time them? Another benefit of quantitative tests is you can get a feel for how your product will perform for the specific goals that you're running this product change to begin with for. So say like one of the main reasons we're doing this is we want to give as many people access to bikes as possible, and we want to make this unlock experience fast, reliable, and intuitive. So one way we could look at how reliable it is the percentage of times where someone tries to unlock and it just doesn't work. Maybe they get stuck in the flow, maybe they have some sort of connectivity issue, but in any case, they tried it and then they weren't able to get that bike in the end that they were hoping to get. If we can show that a product change has a 1% improvement in reliability, and these are made up numbers, but let's say we have 100,000 unlock attempts a day, that could lead to 1,000 people who get where they're going when they weren't going to get there otherwise. So these are some hard numbers that we could use to get a prediction for whether or not it's going to be better to go to this new solution and exactly how much better we expect it to be. So what are the steps to running a quantitative test? Well, the first thing we need to do is figure out what things we're going to measure. So that's what I'm going to call picking our metrics. So it could be which one do you prefer? It could be seconds to unlock. It could be percentage of unlock attempts successful. But in the end, it's going to look like a number versus a choice versus like kind of open-ended feedback from a user. The second step is once we have our metrics, we're going to design our test, our experiment. So maybe we're going to run an A/B test like you heard about earlier, where we have the QR code unlock and the PIN code unlock. We battle them against each other and see which one works best for our metrics that we decided. Sometimes you only have one product that you've built though. Maybe you don't have the availability to make 3 variants of your prototype and you've got one. That's fine. You can run what I'm going to call a benchmark test where you have certain expectations about how well it will perform and you can compare it against those expectations. And then once you've collected this data from your test, then you're going to run it, you're going to analyze it, and then you're going to, if necessary, you might need to repeat it, maybe with a product change, maybe with a new metric, but retest as necessary until you get the conclusions that you need to have. So let's talk about the first step of running a quantitative test. So picking the metrics. So our first one I proposed, which I hinted at was maybe not the best, was what is your preferred unlock experience? And one example of why this might not be the best metric is that it might have overlooked something critical here. So maybe people really preferred QR unlock in some cases, but in the minority of people didn't like QR unlock. But if you ask them what happened, they said, I'm not even able to unlock the bike because I can't understand it. So here, this metric doesn't really encapsulate the reliability and intuitiveness aspect that we hope to cover, even though it does cover the fast aspect. And it doesn't matter if you can unlock a second faster if some users have a lot of trouble unlocking the bike. So we can do better than this. So let's think about our metrics, which was, what is your preferred unlock experience and the percentage of people that prefer A versus B. So the first problem is, what does prefer actually mean? To someone that might mean fast, to another person that might mean reliable, or intuitive, or some combination of all three. So this kind of vague term is preventing us from gathering data that ties directly to our goals. Also, will the person really notice subtle differences, and how would we gather that with data? Like, would a 1 second unlock improvement really show up in this metric, or would a 1% reliability improvement show up? So that's something where we might be able to improve on our metrics here. And then the last thing is this very A/B choice. Doesn't have a lot of precise signal to it. So it might reduce the chance of us being able to conclude something from our results if it's sort of a toss-up. So here's some tips I have for when you run a test of your own, how to make better metrics. So the first thing is to tie the metrics directly to what you want to observe. So instead of saying, I prefer QR unlock, ask them which one was faster. Another way we can improve our metrics is instead of just having it be like A, B, which one was better, we can be very precise around our observations. And instead of just saying which one was faster, measure the exact time it took with experience A versus B. So using these tips, I'm going to propose 3 new metrics. So we started with 1 and now we have 3, but I think it's worth it because they're going to encapsulate our goals way better. So remember, our goals of this product were that it would be fast, reliable, and intuitive. So for fast, we're going to time everyone and keep track of how long exactly it takes them to unlock the bike. For reliability, we're going to look at the percentage of times that people try to unlock a bike and that they succeed. And then for intuitiveness, this is sort of our last metric for catching that that the product is usable by everyone. We're not going to look at just attempts, but we're going to look at overall users and the percentage of them that successfully unlock a bike. So here's an example set up. If we were to do an A/B test, again, you could run a benchmark test too. Nadia Varna talked earlier about how to get users to participate in your tests. So a similar flow there. You want people that are representative of the people who use your product or the people that you want to use your product. So in our case, we would maybe split them up half and half. Half of you try the PIN code unlock, half of you try the QR code unlock, and then we're going to collect those metrics we talked about of measuring unlock time and whether or not they succeeded or failed. Now, if you're short on users, maybe you only have like 25 people available. You could have people try both variants, but just be careful that someone might get better at your experience the more they see it. So if they try QR code first and then PIN code, they might be faster at PIN code than they would have otherwise because of that training they had in the first one. So you want to make sure that the experience of people doing A versus B is as similar as possible, except for the actual product change that you're proposing. So here are some best practices for running the test itself. I'm going to propose three things. One is measuring as precisely as possible, testing across variations of users' environments, and then collecting as much data as possible. So why is it important to be precise? I picked this kind of ridiculous example, but I think it makes a point. So imagine if you were trying to figure out who is fastest in the world and you had the 100-meter dash final, but you only measured to 1 second. So next slide. If this were the case, everyone would get a gold medal. Everyone ran 9 seconds. And even these critical changes in speed weren't observed because we weren't precise enough in our observations. So especially if you're testing a very slight change in behavior like we are with unlock, it's important that we get precise data.
My camera is back on too.
So what are some tips for measuring as precisely as possible? These are some strategies going from bad to great. But one idea is to just ask our testers to time themselves. This isn't great because someone might time themselves very differently than someone else, and we'll get a lot of noise in our data. So I think we can do better than that, especially when the amount of observation error could be the difference between one solution being faster than the other. A better solution is to have a teammate who you trained, stopwatch in hand, watch them unlock a bike and measure consistently across every test. But humans are prone to error. We're not perfect. The best way, if we were able to do it, would be to put code into our app and measure the exact time it took from bike unlock to bike release, especially for something in like this scenario where it might just be a matter of a few seconds overall for the unlock. So the next best practice I want to talk about, which we hinted at earlier, is testing across user and environmental variations. So this is important not only for quantitative tests, but also qualitative tests. So maybe in your lab, you've tested for this experience 1,000 times, you're super confident in it. It's very obvious, it says scan an app, and you pull out your phone and you scan it. Everything's great. Well, this is where quantitative tests can come in because you're able to test on a lot more users and collect other different use cases. So maybe you didn't consider this case. Next slide. Maybe someone is slightly vision impaired and doesn't have the same eyesight as you. Now that thing that was obvious to you of scanning an app is not so obvious to them. And maybe you need a better in-app experience where they can adjust something maybe for their specific vision accessibility needs to know what the next step is. It could have been that you didn't consider this scenario where it was dark out and we have a lot more problems scanning QR codes. So again, this is where quantitative tests can come in, as well as qualitative in terms of gathering data from test environments where you didn't expect it. And then there's always scenarios you just can't plan for. I don't think there's any good way to unlock a bike here, but just an example, like the most extreme example of people will use your product in ways you did not expect. So to recap in terms of this best practice, test across varying users in terms of things like height, weight, age, gender, many other things, new phones, old phones, people who've used your product versus people who've never tried your product before, as well as varying environmental conditions. All right, the last point I want to make is about collecting as much data as possible. So let's say we're in a hurry. It is build season after all, and we only had time to collect 3 points of data. Maybe we had trouble recruiting researchers. And we see that QR unlock is faster than pin unlock with our 3 tests. So you can probably guess that this is maybe not enough data to make a conclusion. Like maybe if it was just so much faster or so much more reliable, we could, but odds are if it's a slight improvement, it's not gonna work. So why is that? Let's go to the next slide. A good example for why data size is important is, let's say you want to know what number I'm going to roll most likely if I were to roll a die. Now you probably know, well, it's obvious. It's like it's the same for every single one. But this is a kind of a good comparison. If you don't have enough data, you can draw the wrong conclusions. So let's say I roll the die 3 times and I see that I roll 2/3 of the time. Well, of course, I'm going to like go to Vegas and just roll 2 every time. Like that's what I expect. But the reality is that you have a little bit of sampling error because you haven't collected enough data. So if you go to the next slide, here's a plot of the percentage of the time that you roll each number over the number of rolls, where the x-axis is how many times you've rolled, and the y-axis is the percentage of time that you roll it. So you can obviously see on the left side, with a very small number of rolls, number 2 is looking great. We roll it half the time, like this is the number we expect. But as we get more rolls, we start to see it converging on what the true behavior is, which is a 1/6 chance of getting every number. So the dice example is a good way of saying that it's different than our product, where we might have expectations of something being better. Like with a dice, we wouldn't say like, well, obviously 2 is better, but with your product, you might. So you just have to be careful that even if things look the way you expect them to in terms of your solution being better, it could be that you just need more data. So it's something to keep track of. This is kind of a complicated subject, so I'm not going to go super deep in it, but if you're interested, do some Googling on statistical significance, because that can tell you some techniques you do when doing quantitative tests to make sure that what you're seeing is likely a result of your product change and not just sampling error. Cool, so say we took our tip to collect more data, we did 100 testers this time, and we did observe that our QR unlock was faster. Great, this is like super exciting. This is the whole reason we built this product. We did notice one problem though, that 10% of people were unable to unlock the bike at all. And this wasn't the case with pin codes. So this is made up data. So don't quote us on this, but 10% of people did fail to unlock. So this is very concerning. And this is why quantitative tests can help. So if you go to the next slide, maybe you do a deep dive in the data and we have timestamps for all of the tests that we've run, and we find a pattern, just like we found patterns in our qualitative data, except in the quantitative data, what we find is at night, we have a very high percentage of times where QR unlock is failing. And then we go out and test it in the field and we see this experience where you open your phone, it's just all black. So this is a problem, and this is good feedback that we can use to improve our product. So what did we learn from this quantitative test? Well, first is that environment plays a huge factor in unlocking. So we should consider adding flash for this low option light condition. And we can give this feedback to our team and they can bring it back to the product. The other thing we learned is that we're on the right track. We saw that QR unlocks are trending faster, and that's a good sign. So maybe we should retest once we've introduced that flash change. Cool, so that's it on quantitative tests. I'm gonna hand it back to Nadia to wrap things up.
Thanks, Brady, that was awesome. So remember, we thought about our hypotheses earlier. We put in our guess, are we gonna keep the old PIN code? Are we gonna switch to QR codes? And we'll also talk about, just to recap, some of our key takeaways on how we did the research. So to think about just what are our key takeaways here, we actually did launch the QR code experience. We did see it was better, even though the data we shared here wasn't the exact data the Lyft team saw, but we ended up launching that. So if you have a bike share system from Lyft near you, you can check it out. You can see the QR code in the wild today. And just to talk about some key takeaways from our research learnings, user testing can definitely help you build a better product. It helps you learn earlier in the process and helps you make sure that you have the best possible product for your users, or in our case, our riders at launch. You can interview and observe your users through qualitative testing. We got a chance to practice that with our backpack exercise, and users might experience the product differently than you expect. We had some great share outs on how users had challenges with our strappiness of our backpack, how there were things that we maybe didn't expect as the team building the backpack. And finally, as Brady shared, you can measure and project performance using quantitative tests. That helps you launch with confidence. You'll know that your product meets those goals that you set for yourself, and it helps give you preciseness and specificity there. So TLDR, it is worth it to test. You're gonna learn, you're gonna save time, you'll potentially save costs, both in terms of your team's effort, but actually costs in terms of investing in your next prototypes. And if you need ideas, I think we'll share out this deck so you can check it out. You can go to some of those cheat sheets on how to do qualitative and quantitative research. And with that, we'll turn it back to Teresa. Thank you so much for listening to us and putting on your product manager hats.
Thank you, the Lyft folks. I know we're running a little bit long. We just don't want this workshop series to end, but I have a really quick wrap up, and our presenters are able to stand for a little bit longer if you have some questions for them. So as a series wrap up, congratulations. You've finished our 6-week workshop series, but you're not done just quite yet. You've got some homework to do. So we want you to go and identify research questions and hypotheses to test, draft up your test plan, and of course, conduct user testing from a lot of the tools that we learned today. Then we want you to iterate on your design and test again. As you can see, design thinking can be an infinite loop, but what is not infinite is time. So our award submissions are due March 4th for Innovation Challenge and the Game Design Challenge. And always remember, it's at noon Pacific time. We have some additional resources for you. Always, all of the replays that we've, our slides from today and the replay videos will be available on our website. And then also there's some additional content on the first website. And now in a Star Wars style closing, we really want to have you join me in thanking our 20 breakout facilitators we've had each week, which has totaled over 100 volunteers. Some of them have been our phenomenal student leaders. We also like to thank our 20 presenters over this last 6 weeks, some of whom were first alums like Brady, for sharing your gracious times and talent to teach us about product development and design thinking. And then last but not least, obviously our sponsors and partners who enable us to grow future scientists, technologists, and leaders in our community. And as an extra special shout out, I'd like to thank the Stanford D.school, who was coordinated by 1868 Space Cookies mentor Shoshana Cohen for being a partner in making this workshop series possible. Thank you, Sosh. You are truly out of this world awesome. And so this concludes our workshop series. For those of you who need to run and to be game changers, we'll send you off with a virtual high five. For all of you who can stay, please show your friendly face, unmute yourself, and join an interactive Q&A session with our awesome facilitators today, from presenters from Stanford D.school and of course Lyft. So thanks everyone. Again, share your video and your audio. I'm going to stop sharing here.
Yeah, we are opening up for any questions. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions, or post them in the chat if you'd like.
Actually, I'm going to ask a question that was in the chat earlier related to Lyft. Someone said, and I can relate to this, if you're a parent and you're wanting to get multiple bikes, is that like a user case you come across often and design for?
Arna, do you want to take this one or should I?
Go for it, Nadia. I can support afterwards.
Yeah, so definitely we've seen that for a lot of folks, particularly when they're taking their first bike ride, there is a degree of just comfort that comes with riding with friends. Now, thinking about it from a product and design standpoint, you have to think a lot about, can you really enable folks to take rides for others? For bikes, you want to make sure people are safe, that you sort of know who they are, and that, if something goes wrong, you're able to follow up with them. So for those reasons, typically we don't allow sort of group riding, although it is something that we've thought a lot about. But you do want to make it really easy to invite a friend to take a ride with you and to get up and started on their own.
Yeah, I can add to that. I think we have some interesting cases of like making sure biking is social. Like Nadia was saying, we have things like guest passes where you can gift a ride to your friend. I think the specific use case of, a parent and their kids, I think we do have some like age restrictions in some markets just for safety. I think if you think about our scooter markets, you actually have to have a driver's license to be able to ride a scooter as per some of the regulations by the cities. We work really closely with the government and the policy folks in each city to make sure we're following any of their, motor vehicle rules. So there's a lot of like different kind of constraints that we need to consider, but we want to come up with products that still make bike riding and scooter riding social. So we always have this like nice balance of both.
Awesome. I look forward to that feature. Thank you.
Another question came up in the chat about, was there any consideration to giving both options? I mean, could you have a QR code and a code to kind of fulfill everyone's needs?
I could take that one. From the engineering side, any code that we have to maintain, there's maintenance cost to it. They can break. We have to, on the server side, be able to generate PIN codes. On the client side, we need to have UI that is reliable and works well for both of these variants. So there are costs, and we consider them from time to time. And also, even during the experimentation phase, sometimes we'll support both and A/B test users. But usually at some point, we want to unify and have a consistent experience. And so that's something we normally work towards if we find one that we want to go with.
I have one thing I like to add too. I think I saw another comment in the chat of like, what do we do with someone without a smartphone? I think it was also a follow-up question. So this is something that we've thought about, and beyond these two app-based ways of unlocking, in a lot of our markets we have physical kiosks at bike stations where someone who maybe doesn't have like a credit card, they can potentially use cash, or if they don't have a smartphone, they can actually physically type and unlock a bike with a physical kiosk. So these are a lot of things that we also work with our city partners to make sure it's like an equitable transportation mode kind of across the different groups of people who are riding.
May I ask a question, please?
Of course.
Thank you. So, when you open a bike, is it only available at a bike, like sort of like bike rack? Because what happens if you're at like a mall and there's no bike rack? How do you get a bike, please?
That's a great question, Eric. So it's actually something where historically it used to just be that you would go to the dock and get the bikes. And with more recent product iterations, we've introduced a new system where you, maybe in some of those screenshots, saw that cable lock. So in some cases, particularly for our e-bikes, you're actually able to lock your bike to a bike rack in the wild using that cable lock system to sort of exactly meet that use case that you described of you might not have a dock near you, but still want to be able to get a bike. And so it gives a little bit more flexibility in terms of where you can ride and park.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Of course. Great question.
the cable lock brought us some really interesting UX research problems because there's now 2 locks on the bike. So it's like, what if you go up to the station, but someone put the cable lock in? Like, will that person know to pull the cable lock out? And we found that we have to basically put a buzzer that's like, pull out the lock. It's unlocked, but it's still blocking the wheel from moving. So we had to put a buzzer that's like, holster the cable lock so you can pull out the bike. So it's certainly added to the complexity.
So I have a question. I know just working with the Stanford crew, and again, thank you, Shoshana, for leading the effort. You know, these are there's design thinking, or there's a packet and tools available for anyone to use. Do you want to share anything about, you know, again, you've sort of customized the learning for our first students, which we greatly appreciate, but do you have any thoughts or suggestions about, you know, maybe teams want to do a deeper dive into design thinking individually?
Are you asking me or the students?
Anyone.
Okay. So the D.school, one of the things that the D.school is very proud of is making everything pretty much open sourced. So it's not meant to be a big mystery or proprietary, or you can only do it if you're a Stanford affiliate in some way. So if you just go on to the Stanford D.school site, which I think is just dschool.stanford.edu, I can check, you will find a whole array, a library of materials that you are free to use as you choose. So you can modify them, you can use them as is, you can ignore 3 steps if you want and just go to the 5th one. You can do whatever you want with them. And there's no licensing, there's nothing like that. It's not meant to be a big mystery. And you can also just go onto YouTube and find lots and lots of people's interpretations of how they've used the same tools. So do not think for a minute that this needs to be some sort of Stanford effort. It's just, I'm lucky enough to work with great students and I can pull them into things like this.
Awesome. So I want to pick on Brady one more time. Is you've said to me multiple times you are doing FRC for adults at Lyft. You want to kind of share what that, you know, how what you think you do in terms of how that related to FIRST and such?
Oh yeah, I liked FIRST so much I just turned it into a job. But no, it's very similar to the robot that the kids work on in a normal build season. It's got a motor, it's got a battery, it's connected. We have short deadlines where we have to meet certain goals. Instead of having a games competition, we have cities who challenge us to meet certain product requirements by certain dates. We've got the hardware team, we've got the software team, we've got marketing and research, similar to a FIRST team. So in many ways it is similar, and it's a connected e-vehicle. So yeah, I mean, the things that you're learning in FIRST are very applicable to the real world, especially as we have more e-vehicles out there.
Awesome. Appreciate that summary. I know we're 15 minutes after, and I know teams have a March 4th deadline to work on, but any other questions for our amazing presenters today? Well, I want to say thank you again. It's just, you know, sort of bittersweet. We've had a great 6 weeks of learning, and we really appreciate all of our presenters, and particularly today, I think was really fun. And I think it's something that we can all relate to and very much apply to what we're doing at this time, getting data for our innovative games design solutions. And we appreciate you sharing your time and talents to allow us to do that. So, and as well, I got to see Raytheon here has been a former presenter. So thank you, and thank you all. Hope you have a wonderful Saturday, and thank you again for volunteering and being with us.
Thank you so much, everyone. Really, really appreciate everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.